circumcision has been practiced throughout Africa for, many years, often as an initiation into adulthood for young men. But not all societies have adopted this practice. So, and there's a difference between, in some respects, voluntary male medical circumcision and what is done during these initiation rituals. Another champion, His Excellency Chief Jonathan Mumena from the Republic of Zambia, will talk to us about incorporating voluntary medical male circumcision into traditional culture.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be able to talk to you about this very, very emotive subject and very interesting at the same time. I come from Zambia, and I come from a province of Zambia in the northwestern part of Zambia, which has many, many cultures, and it's very, very cultured. I am Kaonde, and I'm mentioning so for very, very deliberate reasons. We are very cultured people, but amongst the many cultures that we have, male circumcision is not one of them. However, we have other neighbors in the region that use male circumcision as part of their culture. In that case, they use male circumcision as a rite of passage on becoming a man. A young man growing up must be circumcised. And in fact, if you were a man amongst them and you were not circumcised, you were not considered a man. And it is still so today. If you're not circumcised, they don't consider you anywhere near men. Because male circumcision programs there are not just about the circumcision. It is actually, most of them would go in for about 1 whole month, and they are taught about what it means to become a man. How do you take care of your family? How do you survive? How do you do this and that? How do you build a house? How do you contribute to your culture? And then the circumcision part is just a small thing, but they are there for 1 month, and in the process, the healing takes place, and then there is a very big graduation ceremony, and everybody comes out in new clothes, and there's a relation, there's a party, and all that. That is on becoming a man, the rite of passage. However, we find that we have challenges. When I became chief 1st October 2000, we realized that one of the biggest challenges had been HIV and AIDS. And every family has been affected. Every family has known the sorrow of HIV and AIDS. And I became an HIV and AIDS activist. But I also did realize one fact that we needed to go a little bit tangible, further action. And the 30 years that we've had HIV and AIDS has been a reign of terror. And we all know it. As much as we are not a circumcising tribe, how did I become an advocate for male circumcision? While I thought everything was all well and we were talking about all these other things and what have you, one February morning last year, my son Benjamin, 18 years old, walks up to me and said, "Daddy, I want to talk to you." And he says, "Daddy, I want to go for MC." And I didn't know what MC was all about. So I said, "What are you talking about? You want to training for Master of Ceremonies?" He says, no. He looked down and he said, "Male circumcision." Now, you can imagine I am a custodian of the culture of our people, and I am a defender, and I make sure that we take it to the maximum, and my own son comes back and tells me he wants to go contrary to our culture. I didn't know what to say. But I said, where do you want to do it? He told me. That's the only question. And then I said, go ahead. And I remained questioning. Then, while we, the elders of our culture, were not talking about this, I realized the youths were already far ahead. And I began to carry out my own research and got in touch with Society for Family Health. And they told me more about it. I realized my son was more advanced. To cut a long story short, I became a convert of my own son. Voluntary male circumcision. While the traditional parts do, we have the traditional circumcisers. I think that we're not saying that we must forego the traditional circumcising, because it is a lot more than the circumcision anyway. But for those of us that are not circumcising, we have a challenge. Because one of the myths I used to think was that to go for circumcision meant looking and turning my back on my own culture. But I realized that it was more than that. It is a question of survival. What was the purpose of having a culture if we were going to die and leave the culture? So it became a survival strategy. And now we've been telling our people, it is not that you are abandoning your culture. You must survive in order to enjoy this culture. And male circumcision, now, of course, we're also encouraging those that are the traditional circumcisers to find a way of making it much more safer. And this is the message that we've been taking over, and we think that in Africa, culture is very, very important, and you all know, and it's as good as gospel truth. But what culture is, again, not cast in concrete. It is
fluid, constantly evolving.
Thank you.
Can I help you finish? Yes. A question for you. Are there traditional groups within your country, or do you know whether it's an issue? Do certain groups feel that voluntary medical male circumcision usurps the role of tradition? In other words, you know, that this process or this procedure is cutting into their turf. Is this, if you understand what I'm saying?
Thank you very much. That's an interesting question. You know, we've always looked at, I'll start it this way. Those of us that are not circumcising always looked at circumcision as a very, very primitive culture, brutal, and so on and so forth. That's how we looked at it. But now we know that they knew better. And my province, Northwestern Province, is a province that has the lowest HIV prevalence rate in the whole country. And the reason is that we have many more tribes there that do circumcision. And so this is one thing that teaches me that it is indeed working. But I also want to say that in terms of culture, it is there with us and it is going to stay. But we need to see how best we can incorporate the traditional part and also bring in the medical part so that we don't have one instrument being used for many more men. And then in which case, in the face of HIV and AIDS, it becomes retrogressive.
Right. Thank you. The gentleman here. Sorry.
My name is Tim Farley. I used to work in WHO, was involved very much in some of the initial work on developing guidelines and so forth. Your Excellency, I'm most impressed by your story and also your courage to embrace circumcision as a survival strategy for your culture. I was also impressed by your description of your circumcising neighbors, and that they didn't only just circumcise, but they taught the boys how to be a man, how to look after their family, and so forth. I'm just wondering, in your culture, in your group, what did you do about boys? How did you teach them to become men and look after their families and so forth? All these other things that are part of growing up. Do you have your own coming of age ceremonies and that sort of procedures in your particular culture? If not, how did young boys ever become men in your society?
What I'd like to do is also take the question here, and then you know, His Excellency can answer them both. All right? Yes.
Yes. Hi, my name is Renee Rinson. I'm currently working as a consultant for the Gates Foundation on male circumcision issues. And Chief Mumena, I very much appreciate the work that you're doing about integrating safe circumcision into the rite of passage. And it's very, very important, and other people are doing it. I actually had the pleasure of visiting a circumcision ceremony or circumcision graduation in Zimbabwe.
We have limited time, so if you can very quickly get to the question.
Now, the question, though, is, or some of the thinking is that if circumcision is done in infants, it's safer and cheaper, and that is some of the thinking. Is it possible that the circumcision could be, do you think in these tribes, the circumcision procedure itself would be acceptable to be moved to infancy with the ritual and the important parts of the graduation to manhood without the circumcision procedure because it was done as an infant?
All right, so we have a question about how do you teach young men to become men? How did you do that without circumcision? And if you do it when they're babies, can you still provide that?
Thank you very much. The first question is interesting in the sense that men have had to take leadership in many aspects, but the lack of training that we see in men today is responsible for the many irresponsible behaviors that we see. Yes. Men who can't really rise up and take care of their families and so on and so forth. Low esteem amongst men. It's true. How did we do it traditionally, and how are we doing it in the village? We take that every boy is a disciple of an older man, and the training is done more by word of mouth. As you sit there, there is a side for the men, there is a side for the women. But I must admit that the women, in fact, are more intensive and they do it much better. And no wonder we see that the men and the women are not moved even when we have much calamities in our villages. I think they are more solid than the men. For the men, we sit down there. We are hunters, for instance. And you are taught more in the field. You are not only taught in the village. You need to go out in the field and be able to learn to be a hunter. If you were not a hunter in my tribe, you were no man at all. And so this was taught you as you go out on the hunting sprees and also when you're sitting back at home. This is how training and passage into manhood was done. And then you are also taught what to do, where you go, when you're going to be with your in-laws, what is expected of you, how do you prove yourself to be a man? So that's how we did it, and that's how we're doing it. But I think that there's a gap now with the urbanization of our communities. This is a big challenge.
So, I'm sorry, and can this procedure be done as an infant and still later on, you know, I believe that was the question, you know, incorporate the initiation rituals of, you know, initiating young men into adulthood?
At the present moment, we all know that there is no cure for HIV and AIDS. And decisions must be made and must be taken, and it's all about leadership. Parents must be responsible for their children. And I think that it is important at an early age for any parent who is responsible to consider having their male child circumcised. You never know where your child will be, and you may never know how long you will continue to be on earth. So do it while you can. And I also think that if it is done in infancy, it's even better. Yes. So I think that this is something that we must consider, and consider very, very carefully, and ensure that, especially that there's no cure, 60% is something that we can all jump for.